Communist China's Zhou Enlai proposes, then all but rejects talks on the Formosa crisis. 29 nations, with a population of more than 1,400,000,000 persons, attend the historic conference in Indonesia's capital city of Bandung. Premier
Hello and welcome to this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. Hello, Clyde. Good to see you, sir. I'm going to get started right away because the subject matter today is, number one, something I've never presented about before. And I'm pretty sure that 99% of us who are either with us right now live or watches this at some other time will find this information kind of startling, and the fact that we knew nothing about it. And I didn't put too much information in the title because I didn't want to tip off certain forces that monitor us, but I'm going to do it this way. This is for all the trolls and the agents that are against us. If you can continue to watch and listen to this, you'll begin to get a severe headache and you'll begin to feel sick as a dog. So the best thing for you to do is to stop watching this right now. And I'm speaking directly to your subconscious. All right, now, here's the deal. I was back a little while ago, I was re-listening to Malcolm, and one of his speeches is called Message to Grassroots, and it's from November of 1963. And he mentioned something that I had never really paid much attention to back then, in the past when I heard the speech. And so I decided, let me go see more about this. And he mentioned Bandung. And I said, I kind of vaguely heard that word before, but I didn't really know what it was. And so when I went and started doing the research, I was like, what? This is seriously something they kept from us. Now, let me read this right here real quick. African independence. During the 1950s and 60s, most African nations gained their independence. I would say many did, but I guess we could say most did. Ghana, formerly, and this is incorrect, I think, it's called the Gold Coast, was the first in 1957. South Africa, the African National Congress, helped lead the fight. And if you recall, it was during that time period that, of course, Nelson Mandela and the leadership of the African National Congress was literally outlawed, and they locked them up. The leadership of a legitimate political party, and it kept them locked up for decades. I want you to keep that in mind. All right. So let's look at what did Malcolm say in Message to the Grassroots that caused me to look at this. He said, in Bandung, back in, I think, 1954, it was actually 1955, was the first unity meeting in centuries of black people. And once you study what happened at the Bandung Conference and the results of the Bandung Conference, it actually serves as a model for the same procedure you and I can use to get our problems solved. At Bandung, all the nations came together. There were dark nations from Africa and Asia. Some of them were Buddhists, some of them were Muslims, some of them were Christians, some of them were Confucianists, some were atheists. Despite their religious differences, they came together. Some were communists, some were socialists, some were capitalists. Despite their economic and political differences, they came together. All of them were black, brown, red, or yellow. Now, stop right there. Is any of this? Do you recall any of this? No, I didn't think so. Bandung, and we'll get to where the heck is Bandung at? Okay, let's continue with what he said. The number one thing that was not allowed to attend the Bandung. Okay, all right. Clyde is saying we elaborated on the Bandung conference from Malcolm X's perspective and more in BAM. Oh, wow, okay. All right, well, I think you'll enjoy this too, Clyde, because I think there's some things in here that you all may not have covered, but if you did, I definitely will go and check it out. The number one thing that was not allowed to attend the Bandung conference was the white man. He couldn't come. Once they excluded the white man, they found that they could get together. Once they kept him out, everybody else fell right in and fell in line. This is the thing that you and I have to understand. And these people who came together didn't have nuclear weapons. They didn't have jet planes. They didn't have all the heavy armaments that the white man has, but they had unity. And see, anytime you tell the white man he can't come, he gets upset, right? All right, here's the last part of this. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, here. Okay. They were able to submerge their little petty differences and agree on one thing, that though one African came from Kenya and was being colonized by the Englishmen, and another African came from the Congo and was being colonized by the Belgian, and another African came from Guinea and was being colonized by the French, and another came from Angola and was being colonized by the Portuguese. When they came to the Bandung Conference, they looked at the Portuguese and at the Frenchmen and at the Englishmen and at the other Dutchmen and learned or realized that the one thing that all of them had in common, they were all from Europe. They were all Europeans, blonde, blue-eyed, and white-skinned. They began to recognize who their enemy was. The same man that was colonizing our people in Kenya was colonizing our people in the Congo. The same one in the Congo was colonizing our people in South Africa and in southern Rhodesia and in Burma and in India and in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. They realized all over the world where the dark man was being oppressed, he was being oppressed by the white man. Where the dark man was being exploited, he was being exploited by the white man. So they got together under this basis that they had a common enemy. Now think about this. This was 1963 when Malcolm was talking about it. One of the most important contributions that Malcolm made to the movement in the United States for many of us, if not most of us who were in our teens and 20s at that time, those of us who became pretty much the backbone of the Black Power movement was that Malcolm taught us to think internationally. You see, we had not really had that brought to us before. It was still localized to the United States. But Malcolm said, no, be international. And this was before the word global came to be used. Uh, be international. So when I went back and I started looking at this, okay, the Bandung Conference and later NAM, the non-aligned movement, okay, it became very important to understand what all was involved. Now, the Bandung Conference in 1955, there were 29 countries from Asia and Africa, most of which were newly independent or becoming or about to become newly independent. Let's take a look for a second at the countries that were involved with the Bandung Conference in 1955. And I want you to pay attention to the names of the countries. Okay, and if you look at the list, there's 30 here, but I'll explain that in a second. One of them is a territory. Okay, but look, the first one up there is the Kingdom of Afghanistan. Think about that. The Kingdom of Afghanistan in 1955. What's going on in Afghanistan today? It's been under, first of all, a war with, it was under attack by the Soviet Union, and the United States has been over there in the longest conflict that the United States has ever been involved in. Has been where? In Afghanistan. And how do we get over there? We got over there, uh, yeah, through lies. Okay, Burma. And I'm going to see who can figure out. And some of this information I'm not going to go into in depth because I want, number one, it would take too long, but also I want to stimulate you to do some of your own research. But Burma, what's it called today? Number three, Kingdom of Cambodia. Cambodia. We'll get to that too. Remember, this is 1955. The Dominion of Ceylon. The People's Republic of China. Cyprus 1. Cyprus. The Republic of Egypt. The Ethiopian Empire. The Gold Coast, which, well, today we call it Ghana, right? India, Indonesia, Iran, the Kingdom of Iraq. Does this begin to start hitting you with a certain pattern of certain information here? Japan, Jordan, the Kingdom of Laos, or Laos, either one. Lebanon, Liberia, the Kingdom of Libya, the Kingdom of Nepal, the Dominion of Pakistan. Yeah, you noticing how all these countries now, in 1955, they were what? Either just gaining their independence, or had just gained their independence, or would gain their independence in a couple of years. What's happened to them since then? The Philippines, Saudi Arabia, Syrian Republic, Republic of the Sudan, Thailand, Turkey, the State of Vietnam, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, and the Monarchist Kingdom of Yemen. Man, is that deep? When I looked at this, now these were the nations that came together in 1955 for the Bandung Conference. It was called the Asia-Africa Conference. All right? Now let's look at, for a second, let's look at a map. And look who is colonizing, like Malcolm said, right? Malcolm said they looked up and they were looking at it wow. If you look at the colors, the real dark blue, right there in the center, that was Belgium. That was that dude, King Leopold. And if you don't know about King Leopold, I would urge you go look at the history of King Leopold. He actually took part of the Congo and claimed it as his personal ownership, his personal colony. And it's a long history of the kind of things that he did that came back to haunt us. It's still haunting us today. That's why I get pissed whenever I see on the news media they will talk about the Tutsis and the Hutus and what happened with them, as if they just up and decided to go to battle with each other, and they don't even mention King Leopold or Belgium, the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1960, right? Rwanda 1962, Uganda 1962. See, in 55 they weren't independent yet; they were on their way. Sudan 1956, that's in the brown. Oh, Great Britain, look at all the brown, that's Great Britain. Sudan, Egypt, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, the Gambia. Britain was like everywhere. But remember what they said. They said the sun never sets on the British Empire. All right? Germany had its pieces down there in Namibia. Okay? France, though, France was busy as... Look at France. That's that kind of purplish. Algeria, Morocco, Mali, Mauritania, Guinea, Cape Verde, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, Central African Republic, Cameroon, Republic of the Congo, Gabon, and even down there in Madagascar. Y'all see this? Portugal, okay? Angola, Malawi, Spain. Spain had its pieces, you know. So they were all over there, and we go back to that other conference they had where they split up Africa. Okay? So the fact that these countries, these 29 countries and leaders came together in 1955, that's significant. That is very significant. Let's take another look at a different view of these same countries and look at African national independence, featuring the date of independence for each one of these nations. Okay? Now remember, the conference took place in 1955. So at that time, as we look at this map, Libya was 1951. Okay? And I was looking through here and I said, well, which ones were actually independent at the time of the conference? Because there was opposition from those countries, that the colonizers, right? And so as I looked, the only ones I could find that were already independent at the time of the conference was Libya. See that? 1951. And the rest all became independent or gained their independence afterwards. The interesting thing, which is never talked about, Ethiopia, they say is historically independent. Ethiopia was never colonized formally. Okay? So understanding that at the time of the Bandung Conference, none of these countries at the time were independent except Libya. Okay? And one more look here. All right. In the 1950s and 1960s, African colonies experienced decolonization and gained independence. The first sub-Saharan African colony to gain its independence was Ghana in 1957. And Ghana is way down on the far left at the bottom, right there at the horn. No, not the Horn. I'm sorry, over on the left-hand side. Ghana, 1957. So again, the only ones that were independent at the time in Africa was Libya. Now, this map does allow us to see a little bit more of the countries that were, of the other countries in Asia that were involved. You see India, 1947, Pakistan, 1947, Burma, 1948, Laos, 1954, Cambodia, 1954, Indonesia, 1949, the Philippines, 1946. Okay, Korea was divided. That's way over there on the top right. It was divided up, North and South Korea, in 1945, coming out of the World War II. Ceylon, which is underneath India, 1948. So you see, a lot of these countries in Asia, they were already experiencing independence. Okay, and if you notice, they were becoming independent from the Japanese, right, and the Dutch. I was surprised. Look how much Italian. That's the yellow. The Italian. Uh, yeah, that was Somalia, Eritrea. Um, hmm. So, uh, yeah. So you look at it and you see it's a lot more of the Asian countries were independent at the time of the Bandung Conference. All right. So I want you to, and I'm doing this because I want you to see the world, see it from the world view. Um, because we need to understand it from the world view, right? All right, let's look at it from the world view. Let me see here. All right, this is a world map with the Pacific centered. All right, now first let's locate ourselves in the United States so we get some perspective. And as we look to the left, you'll begin to see where there's China, right? And from that point, you can see where all of that fits in, all of that's going on, Pakistan, India, all of that, right? And then you get to Africa with all of that stuff going on. Okay? Whew, man. Now, again, this was 1955. Let's get even closer. Let's get even closer. As we look at where is this place, Bandung? Well, as you look down on the lower left of this map, you'll see Jakarta. And right under Jakarta, you'll see Bandung. So it's not like it's no, it's not no simple place to get to, right? All right, you see Singapore, Malaysia, right? Uh, it's out in the middle of the ocean. Places that only my friends who are real live world travelers have gone to Jakarta. And I don't know any of them that's been to Bandung. But I was looking at this, I was fascinated because I said, now they really went out of the way to have this conference. Because now where is this in relationship to the rest of the world? This is Indonesia we're talking about, right? So let's see. Okay, here we go. Indonesia. Well, look up in the left-hand corner, and we see Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand. Ah, we know these places, right? Over to just to the right of that, the Philippines, Manila and stuff, right? So now we get a better idea. Malaysia over here, Singapore, Malaysia, uh, and down there again, Jakarta and Bandung. And way down at the bottom, you see Australia and New Guinea over here on the right. So I'm like, this is deep because there was this independence movement that basically kicked off in 1955, and it took place in Bandung in Indonesia, and it brought, well, let's look at this. It brought together, I'll say some names to you. You just think about it. Sukarno, Nasser, Nehru, Tito, Nkrumah, Ho Chi Minh, Zhou Enlai, Sihanouk, U Thant, Indira Gandhi. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Does that begin to hit you with something? Now, I'm gonna tell you what happened. Uh, they were watching this. They were watching it close, and they had a problem. The dilemma for the United States was at the time the United States was engaged in what was called the Cold War, where it was essentially they said was a Cold War between the United States and at the time they said the Soviet Union and the communist world. And on the one hand, if they tried to show that they were in line with these third world nations by trying to pretend like they were against colonialism, it risked alienating their colonialist friends, their allies in Europe, who were the colonizers, right? So what they did was they were also very concerned with that the conference would expand China's influence in the region. Yeah, think about it. 1955. Remember, in 1955, China had not opened itself up to the West. China was still very closed. It didn't open up to the West till what? To the late 60s when Nixon was president, and that dude went over there. First time somebody had been allowed in from the United States or something. So in 1955, the United States formed what was called a working group on the Afro-Asian Conference. That's what it was called. It included the operations of the court. It included the Operations Coordinating Board, the OCB, the Office of Intelligence Research, the OIR, the Department of State, State Department, the Department of Defense, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the United States Information Agency. That's the USIA, which is a propaganda agency. The OIR, that was the Office of Intelligence Research, and the USIA, the United States Information Agency, followed a course of, quote, image management, unquote, for the United States, using overt and covert propaganda to portray the United States as friendly and to warn participants of the communist menace. Understand what they were doing in 1955. They were saying, oh, the communists, got to watch them communists. Now, the United States they were still reeling from the McCarthy era when they had Senator McCarthy. Look that up. When they were, quote, blacklisting people I call it whitelisting. Um, so in other words, United States, their spy agencies and propaganda agencies and stuff went to work. 1955. Now let's look at what there were some black people. There were some black people from the United States who were there, and this is surprising. Let's check it out. There was a brother by the name of Adam Clayton Powell Jr. He was a representative, Democratic representative from New York. He attended the conference. He was sponsored by Ebony and Jet magazine. Yeah, not the U.S. government. And Adam Clayton Powell spoke at some length in favor of American foreign policy, which assisted the U.S., the United States, standing with the non-aligned countries, which I'll explain in a minute. When he came back to the United States, he urged President Dwight D. Eisenhower and the Congress to oppose colonization and pay attention to the priorities of emerging third world nations. Now, you know that fell on deaf ears, right? But he wasn't the only one. Yeah, besides Adam Clayton Powell, there was a brother named Richard Wright. He was an author. And Richard Wright, if you don't know, look up Uncle Tom's Children, Native Son, Black Boy, The Outsider, and more. Now, he attended the conference with funding from the Congress of Cultural Freedom. He spent about 3 weeks in Indonesia. He went to the conference for a week, and the rest of his time he was interacting with Indonesian artists and intellectuals to gather information to write several articles and a book on his trip to Indonesia and attendance at the conference. His book on the trip was called The Color Curtain, a report on the Bandung Conference. You might want to look that up sometime. The Color Curtain, a report on the Bandung Conference. I never had heard of it. Never had heard of it. Never came across it in my research before. Now, also, there was a very, very important woman who was there. Her name was Ethel Lois Payne. Now, she's known as the first lady of the black press. Now, I knew about her because she was originally from Chicago, and she wrote for the Chicago Defender for years. She was also the first black woman commentator to work for CBS, and that didn't come about until 1972. But she was known. She wrote on the civil rights movement during the 50s and 60s, and she was known for asking the questions that others refused or were scared to ask. She became the Washington correspondent and editor for the Chicago Defender for about 20 years. Ethel Lois Payne. And if I'm not mistaken, I also think she became the first black woman to get White House press credentials. So my point here is that there was representation there of black Americans, but we didn't, I have yet to run across anybody who understood what went on over there, or even that we had black people there writing about it. And the fact that Adam Clayton Powell went there under the auspices of Ebony and Jet, I'm like, whoa. So I went back and I was looking at the Ebony magazines, and I couldn't find anything in the Ebony about it. Now, I did find what I thought was a little bitty article in Jet, but it really didn't say much. So I think, or I believe, I think and I believe that quite possibly Ebony and Jet paid for the trip, but I think they gave all the information, to the government, especially since Adam came back and said, "Hey, y'all need to be on the side of these emerging countries, not the ones that's not the colonizers." Now, what you're looking at right now is a little graphic that's showing the process of independence between roughly um, the 50s and 60s, okay, and how they gradually became independent. All right. Now, here's the deal. After this conference in 55, the next thing that occurred was something called the Belgrade Conference in 1961. All right. Now, the Belgrade Conference led to the establishment of the non-aligned movement, the NAM, NAM, N-A-M, NAM or NAM, we'll call it NAM, N-A-M, the non-aligned movement. And what does that mean? Well, um, first we need to understand who all was involved with that, because the Belgrade Conference in September 1961, it had representatives from Afghanistan, Algeria, Burma, Cambodia, Cuba, Cyprus, Ethiopia, Ghana, Guinea, India, Indonesia, Iran, Lebanon, Mali, Morocco, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Tunisia, United Arab Republic, Yemen, and Yugoslavia. And what was it? It was organized in 3 working commissions: political, economic, and cultural. Um, the final communique issued at the time incorporated the conclusions of the conference on economic cooperation, cultural cooperation, rights of men, self-determination, issues of the dependent peoples, promotion of peace, and the world cooperation with the principles of peaceful coexistence, as well as the condemnation of racial discrimination and radioactivity. So, in 1960, as a result of what was achieved in Bandung in 1955, the creation of the non-aligned movement was given a boost by the ordinary session of the United Nations General Assembly, during which 17 new African and Asian countries were admitted. Remember, I said before this conference in 1955, a lot of the countries, African and Asian countries, weren't in the United Nations. Back then, you had to have, remember, you have a strange thing with the United Nations, is that there were certain countries that were allowed to veto anything all the rest could do. And I think it was the United States, the Soviet Union, it might have been China too, but I knew those 2 in particular, either one of them could veto anything that the United Nations came up with. Even if all the other nations were for it, they could veto it. And so after Bandung, they started paying attention. And they let 17 new countries in. Now, the leaders, it was Belgrade in 1961. The key role in this process that created the non-aligned movement was Nasser of Egypt, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Nehru of India, Sukarno of Indonesia, and Tito of Yugoslavia. Now, had you ever seen a picture like this before? when they talked about them being leaders together, that's a powerful picture. And I'm telling you, that group of leaders scared the pants off of Europe and the United States. They became the founding fathers of the non-aligned movement. And so in 1961, the NAM was officially established in September 1961. This Belgrade conference, let me put this up here so you can see it. Um, the Belgrade conference was attended by 25 countries. And let me see. Okay, that was 1961. 25 countries: Afghanistan, Algeria, Yemen, Myanmar, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Congo, Cuba, Cyprus, Egypt, Ethiopia, Ghana, Guinea, India, Indonesia, Iraq, Lebanon, Mali, Morocco, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Tunisia, Yugoslavia. Now, let me just look at this list for a second. Again, 1961, Afghanistan, what's going on with Afghanistan today? Cambodia, what's going on, what happened to Cambodia after that time period? The Congo, yeah, we know, there's still stuff going on with there. Cuba, um, Ghana, we lost Kwame Nkrumah because the United States and the West helped kill him. Iraq, we know what happened with Iraq. In fact, the United States, as it turned out, had positioned the leader of Iraq, right? Until they decided, well, it's time to get rid of him. Saudi Arabia, well, they infiltrated Saudi Arabia, and today Saudi Arabia is like one of the best allies of the United States, even though virtually all of the people involved in the so-called 9/11 attack were all from Saudi Arabia. But the United States didn't attack Saudi Arabia, did they? They attacked Iraq. Somalia, been going through famine and all kind of stuff. And in fact, every government that came into power in Somalia has been attacked and killed off. Sudan, Syria, got some serious stuff going on right now in Syria. So this is why I wanted to do this, to look at what happened then and what happened after that. Because it's not an accident, it's not a coincidence that all the countries that were involved in this went through and have gone through all kinds of stuff, from coups to attacks to sanctions to all kinds of things that the United States and the West, the European countries, have been at the bottom of. Now, they called it a movement, the non-aligned movement. Let me just explain quickly what non-aligned meant. It meant that there was agreement that they would not align themselves with the big powers. The big powers. The non-aligned movement is 120 developing world states that are not formally aligned with or against any major power bloc. After the United Nations, it is the largest groupings of states worldwide. And it represents nearly 2/3 of the United Nations members and contains 55% of the world population. Now, you would think that we should know about this because is it still in existence? Yes, it is. This graphic right here, this was the 16th conference of the non-aligned movement. This took place in 2012 in Iran. In Iran. Yeah. So they've had one or two since then. This is a list of the countries that are currently in NAM. These are the African countries. Okay? These are the African countries that are part of the non-aligned movement. And every country except South Sudan and Western Sahara is a member of the non-aligned movement. Now, when have you heard them mention NAM or the non-aligned movement whenever they talk about Africa? I've never heard them mention this on American news. And yet, 53 countries in Africa are presently a part of the non-aligned movement. Now, here's something else to consider. One of the things that has occurred, they established this so-called World Court, and the World Court has gone almost exclusively after leaders of African countries to charge them with crimes against humanity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And some of the African countries have said, hey, we don't have nothing to do with y'all because y'all just racist. And so there's a reason why you don't hear anything about the non-aligned movement in this country. Let me show you something here. This is from 2015. You see this? 2015. I want you to look at this. It's a commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the Asian African Conference in 2015, Advancing South-South Cooperation, Bandung, Indonesia, April 24th, 2015. Do you see that? Now, you would think that something this large would have been news in the United States, but I bet you never saw this photograph and never heard about this in 2015. I just like this. I'm sitting it there because I love this photograph. It's something that we should know about and we should be involved in if we can. And we should definitely know what they're doing. There's a lot of Black and Asian people in there. Now, and I especially say that because of this. There's a lot of activity going on in some African countries with China. And you have some people in this country, some Black people even, that say, oh, the Chinese are exploiting the Africans. And the Africans better wake up because they don't know what's happening. Wait a minute, hold up. We talking about the same Africans that have been exploited for several hundred years by the Europeans and had millions of African people stolen from Africa, from African countries, and brought into the West and into the Caribbean and South America and the United States and enslaved. Excuse me. But for 50, 60 years, there's been activity going on between the Chinese and other Asian countries and African countries. So I don't think that it's really what we have been told is this infiltration of China into Africa to exploit it. They've been partners in stuff for a long time. And the United States has done a lot to try to sabotage that. So it's just something to think about. It's up to you. but you have the facts. So I'm going to close out with something I want you to look at and just think about it. It's from the non-aligned movement website because it's very active. And so from this point on, hopefully you will now um, have a window into something that this country has done its best to keep us uninformed about. That they have done their best to try to pretend doesn't exist. The non-aligned movement. The non-aligned movement. And as always, I say, um, no justice, no peace, no love. KNOW.